What's up, guys? Welcome back to a new video here. So I actually just finished the Shannon Sharpe and Kamala Harris podcast. She went on Club Shay Shay, which is Shannon Sharpe's podcast, and it's pretty big, guys. I mean, this is not like a small podcast. Of course, he has a very famous Cat Williams interview on there, which has over 80 million views. And it was pretty interesting. I mean, there's no question that Shannon Sharpe wants her to win, and that's important to know. He's open about that. Like, he openly wants her to win. So obviously the questions were more in the softball realm, 100%. That's why the difference with Joe Rogan is he presents himself as a neutral arbiter, but it's really not. It's really not. It's pretty clear he supports Trump in that sense, which why it's a little different of a scenario with Sharpe and Kamala and Trump and Rogan. But the first 20 minutes were pretty interesting in the sense that there was really no policy questions in the first part of it. Kamala spoke about her background. A lot of it was about her background, growing up with a single mom, which is pretty interesting. But then it got into the policy discussion where I thought she had some pretty good attacks on Trump, where she was talking about how, and it was very centered on the black community also. Shannon Sharpe was basically trying to make the case for her. And a lot of the questions, for example, were about some were Trump, where she would say, "Oh, about how he would take advantage of black tenants, the Central Park Five, how Trump would take ads out against them, as well as a lot of his rhetoric." And she basically kept repeating that multiple times, trying to get the message across, as well as a number of instances where she would talk about the stimulus checks, for example, where I thought this was probably one of her most effective lines in the entire interview, where she kept saying how, Trump really did not want these checks passed. And a lot of Republicans' arguments today are against these checks. It was unnecessary, but because it passed through a Democratic House, Trump wanted his signature on it, of course, so people thought the checks were coming from him, and he ended up signing off on it. So in reality, she was trying to make the case that he was not trying to get stimulus checks passed. She also talked about Social Security, for example, how, and under Trump's plan, according to many economists, from her perspective, Social Security go insolvent in 6 years from now. Now, of course, it's a political line. I'm sure many Republican economists would disagree with that, but in terms of an audience like this, it's an effective line of argument in a scenario like this. Now, as far as getting her message across, how did she come across in terms of optically? I thought she came across as pretty personable, especially with Shannon. Shannon obviously likes her and supports her, so it's easier in that sense. But overall, is it really going to change anything? I don't know. I think continuing to go on podcasts such as these, it definitely helps her case, especially with Trump also taking a similar strategy. It definitely helps to compete in that same sphere, which is why I think she probably should go on Joe Rogan at this point, and we'll see if that happens. There's not been much murmurs about that, but I don't think it's impossible that we see her eventually go on Rogan. Now, she also brought up the fact how, because I was curious to see if she was going to talk about this, about what John Kelly's comments in this interview, and she did bring it up, where a bunch of people who've worked for Trump have come out against him, calling him dangerous and a threat to democracy. She did bring that up a couple of times, but it was more or less about Trump, I would say, for most of the interview, and more about economic policy, for example, which I think is a good change. I think she needs to be discussing more about policy, and it's more effective because, again, talking about Trump, people have an opinion about Trump one way or the other now, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't discuss your opponent, but it's more effective to discuss your own policies and become more familiar with you. Because, again, let's be fair, guys, she's been pretty new to the electorate in this cycle. She was introduced after Biden dropped out in July. I mean, it's a pretty long amount of time relatively to other Democratic elections, but the U.S. election cycle is so long, where this is a pretty historically short window here. So, again, I think that's the thing with Trump. People have their opinions one way or the other at this point. But overall, I think she came across fine in the interview. We'll see if she goes on Joe Rogan. We'll also probably come out with a video at some point this week about Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden, which is making waves. But yeah, it was pretty interesting, guys. But overall, nothing too significant. But yeah, we'll get back to you with the video probably tomorrow at some point. So, all right, I'll see you guys later.